What if the subway you ride every day had a secret? A train that never stops. A station that doesn't exist on any map. A passenger who was declared dead 20 years ago, yet boards the train again tonight. Detective Alex Carter thought she'd seen it until the body of a long-forgotten man appeared in the last car of a midnight train, perfectly preserved, untouched by time. No witnesses. No records of him ever getting on. Just a pocket full of train tickets spanning decades to a place that shouldn't exist. What happens when a train isn't just a train? When passengers never reach their destination? As Alex follows the clues deep into the city's underground, she'll uncover something far worse than a crime. Something waiting, watching, and calling for its next passenger. Because once you board this train, you might never get off. The subway screeched to a halt at its final destination, the eerie silence of the empty station broken only by the hiss of the braking train. It was past midnight, and the last train of the night had made its journey through the city's underbelly, a steel ghost ferrying those who lurked in the forgotten corners of the metropolis. The conductor, a weary man with deep lines carved into his face from years of monotonous routine, peered into the rearview mirror before stepping out of his cabin. The train was supposed to be empty, yet there, in the last seat of the final car, sat a solitary passenger. At first, the conductor hesitated, an unsettling chill creeping up his spine. The station's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced along the platform. He called out, his voice echoing down the deserted tunnel. "Sir, this is the last stop. You have to get off." No response. The figure remained still, slumped slightly forward, his head resting on his chest. The conductor took a cautious step forward, gripping the radio clipped to his belt, his instincts telling him something was off. Swallowing the unease growing in his gut, he stepped closer, reaching out a tentative hand to shake the man's shoulder. The moment he touched him, he knew. The body was cold, unnaturally stiff. The passenger had been dead for some time. His breath caught in his throat as he stumbled back, fumbling for his radio. "Control, we have a situation on the last train. Possible fatality. Requesting immediate assistance at Bay Street Station." The minutes that followed were a blur of flashing red and blue lights, the arrival of EMTs and the local precinct's patrol officers. Among them was Detective Alex Carter, a rising star in the department, though still considered a rookie in homicide. She had been assigned to routine night patrols, but when the call came in, she was eager to get her hands on a case with some weight. As she arrived at the platform, the first thing she noticed was the odd way the body was positioned unnaturally still, as if it had been deliberately placed rather than slumped over from natural causes. The second thing she noticed was the smell not just of death, but of something older, something that carried the weight of time itself. The victim was a man in his 60s, dressed in a neatly pressed gray suit that looked decades out of fashion. His hair, though thinning, had been combed back with meticulous precision. His hands were folded on his lap, almost peacefully, but it was what was in his pockets that turned the case from a routine investigation into something far more perplexing. Alex slipped on a pair of gloves, reaching into the man's inner jacket pocket. Her fingers brushed against something papery, brittle. When she pulled them out, she felt a deep sense of unease crawl up her spine. Train tickets, dozens of them. Some faded, others pristine, but all bearing the same destination, Bay Street Station. And the earliest ticket dated back 20 years. The forensic team swarmed the scene, flashing cameras and murmured theories buzzing in the background. Alex studied the man's face, her sharp detective's mind already turning. No signs of struggle. No visible wounds. The forensic techs would run a toxicology report, but something told her they wouldn't find anything conventional. "Detective?" A voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to see Officer Dan Ridgway, one of the more seasoned cops, looking pale beneath the station's sickly fluorescent glow. "You're not gonna believe this!" He handed her a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was an old, tattered ID card. The name read Henry Lyle. A name that shouldn't have meant anything to Al except for the fact that Henry Lyle had been declared dead 20 years ago. The weight of the discovery settled on her, pressing against her chest, like an invisible force. The city had its fair share of mysteries, but this was something different. Something that didn't fit into the neat lines of logic and reason. As she looked back at the body at the lifeless passenger who had arrived at his destination 2 decades too late, Alex Carter knew one thing for certain. This case was only just beginning. Detective Alex Carter stood on the dimly lit platform, her mind racing as she turned the brittle ID card over in her gloved hands. Henry Lyle. The name stared back at her, bold yet faded with age. The details were unmistakable: date of birth, home address, a city-issued transit pass clipped behind it. But there was one glaring problem. Henry Lyle had been legally dead for 20 years. She looked back at the body, sitting unnervingly still in the last row of the train car. It was as if he had never left, like he had been riding the subway in some kind of endless loop, waiting for this moment. The forensic team moved around him, their murmurs hushed, their gloves brushing against the lifeless man as they checked for anything unusual. Officer Dan Ridgway shifted beside her, rubbing the back of his neck. "Alex, tell me you got some kind of logical explanation for this." Alex exhaled slowly, forcing her mind to focus. There's no way a man can just show up 20 years after his death, looking like he never aged a day. Unless someone went through a hell of a lot of trouble to make him look that way, Ridgway muttered, nodding toward the medical examiner, who was carefully inspecting the body. Dr. Olivia Marks, one of the city's best forensic pathologists, knelt beside the victim and tilted his head slightly to the side. "There's no immediate cause of death," she said, her tone clipped and professional. "No bruising, no puncture wounds, no signs of a struggle. It's like he just..." "Stop." Alex frowned. "What do you mean, stopped?" Dr. Marks hesitated before answering. "His body is cold, but not as cold as it should be if he'd been dead for hours. He looks like he passed away recently, maybe within the last hour or two." "But that ID? If this is really Henry Lyle..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "That shouldn't be possible." Alex ran a hand through her short, dark hair, frustration simmering beneath her professional exterior. "We need to confirm his identity. Dental records, fingerprints, whatever it takes." One of the techs, a young forensic analyst named Jordan, approached with a perplexed expression. "Detective, there's something else. We ran a quick scan on the train's security cameras. Henry Lyle, this guy, wasn't seen boarding at any of the previous stops." Alex stiffened. "That's impossible. He had to get on somewhere." Jordan shook his head. "The footage shows the train stopping at every station, doors opening, passengers getting on and off. But from the moment it left the previous station until it arrived here, that last car was empty except for him. It's like he appeared out of thin air." A chill ran down Alex's spine. She wasn't the kind of detective who believed in ghosts, but this case was quickly stretching the boundaries of reason. Ridgway muttered a curse under his breath. "So we got a guy who's supposed to be dead, no cause of death, and no record of him getting on the damn train." Alex nodded, her jaw tight. "And a pocket full of train tickets dating back 20 years. Silence settled between them as they stared at the lifeless man, as though he might suddenly open his eyes and explain himself. Alex turned toward the station manager, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous twitch to his hands. "Do you keep old records of passengers? Anything that could show if Henry Lyle was a regular commuter back in the day?" The man swallowed hard before nodding. "We keep some archived records, mostly maintenance log schedules. I can check." "Do it." Alex's voice was firm. "And see if you can pull up anything from the night Henry Lyle was declared dead." As the forensic team zipped the body into a bag and prepared to transport it to the morgue, Alex turned to Ridgway. "I need to find out everything I can about this guy. Who he was, how he lived, and why the hell he's here now." Ridgway smirked. "You thinking resurrection, Carter?" She shot him a look. "I'm thinking someone went to a lot of trouble to make this happen, and I intend to find out why." With that, she stepped away from the platform, leaving the mystery of Henry Lyle to unravel an impossible thread at a time. The cold fluorescent lights of the precinct's records room buzzed overhead as Detective Alex Carter scrolled through the police archives. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, searching for any files related to Henry Lyle, his death report, case notes, anything that could give her a lead. The station was quiet this late at night, just the hum of machines and the occasional voice of an officer passing by. She tapped the enter key, and a file appeared on screen. Henry Lyle, declared deceased. The 17th of April, 2003. Alex clicked the report, her eyes narrowing as she read. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Body recovered at Bay Street Station. No foul play suspected. Alex's breath hitched. Bay Street Station. The same place he was found tonight. She skimmed further. Lyle had been an accountant, lived alone in a small apartment downtown, and had no close family. No one had contested his death. No follow-ups. The case had been shut quickly. Her gut told her something wasn't right. She pulled out her phone and dialed Dr. Olivia Marks, who had taken Lyle's body to the morgue. The call rang twice, before the forensic pathologist picked up. Carter, you're calling fast. Tell me you've got something, Alex said, leaning forward. There was a pause. I've got something, all right, and you're not going to like it. Alex grabbed her notepad. Go on. The fingerprints on Henry Lyle's body? Dr. Marks said. They match the ones we had on record from 2003, meaning this really is Henry Lyle. Alex exhaled, gripping her pen tightly. So it's him. Same man. 2 decades later. Yes, but here's the part that doesn't make sense. Marks continued. His body, it's in perfect condition. No signs of decomposition. No aging beyond what his death report indicated from 2003. Alex's mind raced. But if he's been dead all this time, then he should have been a skeleton by now, Marks finished. But Carter, this is a fresh corpse. Alex pressed her fingers to her temple, trying to process it. A man confirmed dead 20 years ago shows up again, looking exactly as he did back then, with train tickets spanning decades in his pocket. None of this should be possible. She needed more information. Someone had to know something. She turned back to the record search and typed in Henry Lyle, close associates. A short list popped up. One name stood out. Walter Grayson, former subway operator, retired in 2005. Last known address, Riverside Retirement Home. Alex grabbed her coat. If Henry Lyle had secrets, Walter Grayson might be the only one left alive who knew them. And she was about to find out exactly what those secrets were. The Riverside Retirement Home sat on the outskirts of the city, its modest brick walls and neatly trimmed hedges masking the eerie quiet that lingered inside. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a far cry from the gritty subway tunnels where Henry Lyle had been found. Detective Alex Carter stepped through the automatic doors, flashing her badge at the receptionist, a young woman who barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. I'm here to see Walter Grayson, Alex said, tucking her badge back into her coat. The woman sighed, flipping through a folder on her desk. Grayson, room 214, but fair warning he doesn't talk much anymore. Alex nodded and made her way down the corridor. The halls were lined with faded paintings and soft yellow lights, giving the place an artificial warmth that didn't quite settle right. She knocked on the door twice before pushing it open. Inside, Walter Grayson sat in a worn-out recliner, staring at an old black-and-white television that flickered with static. He was in his late 70s, with a wiry frame, thinning white hair, and deep-set eyes that held a haunted look. A thick plaid blanket was draped over his lap, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched the remote. Mr. Grayson? Alex said, stepping closer. He didn't look at her, not buying anything. His voice was raspy, like a man who had spent decades breathing in subway dust. Alex pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. I'm not selling anything. I'm a detective. She paused before adding, and I think you know why I'm here. That got his attention. He slowly turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. A cop? Detective Alex Carter, she clarified. I'm investigating a man named Henry Lyle. Grayson visibly tensed, his fingers tightening around the remote. I don't know that name. Alex leaned forward. That's not true. She pulled a printed photo from her Cotan image of Lyle's body on the subway, lifeless but eerily intact. She placed it on the small table between them. Henry Lyle was found last night on the Bay Street train, dead The problem? He was already declared dead 20 years ago. Walter's face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Alex pressed on. You were a subway operator for decades. Your name came up in his old records. I need to know what happened. Grayson swallowed hard. His gaze dropped to the floor, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a barely audible whisper, he muttered, "He came back." Alex frowned. What do you mean? The old man exhaled shakily, as if reliving something he had spent years trying to forget. His fingers twitched against the blanket. Henry Lyle never left that station. Not really. Alex felt a chill creep down her spine. Explain. Grayson finally met her gaze, and there was something hollow in his eyes. The 17th of April, 2003. I was driving the last train of the night. Routine ride, nothing unusual, until we pulled into Bay Street. He swallowed again, voice shaky. That's when I saw him. Lyle, sitting in the last car just like he was last night. Alex's breath caught. You're saying this has happened before? Grayson nodded. I called it in. The cops came, same as they did for you, declared him dead. But here's the thing. That wasn't the first time I'd seen him. Alex felt her pulse quicken. Go on. Grayson's hands trembled as he gripped the edges of his recliner. I started noticing him years before that. A man in a gray suit, always sitting in the last seat of the final train. At first, I thought he was just some lonely guy, a commuter who didn't have anywhere to go. But then I realized something. He looked at Alex, his voice barely above a whisper. He never aged, never changed. Always the same suit, the same look in his eyes, like he was waiting for something. A lump formed in Alex's throat. And no one else noticed? Grayson let out a bitter laugh. You think anyone cares about a ghost on a train? Half the people on those late-night rides are so lost in their own worlds, they wouldn't notice if the Grim Reaper himself was sitting next to them. Alex tried to make sense of it. So what happened in 2003? Why did they finally declare him dead? Grayson's gaze darkened. Because I made a mistake. Alex's grip tightened around her notepad. What mistake? The old man hesitated, then sighed heavily. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I stayed behind after my shift, waited. I wanted to see if he would get off the train, if he had a home, a destination. But when the train pulled into the last stop, he didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there like he always did. He ran a shaky hand over his face. So I walked over, tapped his shoulder, and the moment I touched him, he collapsed, like a puppet with its strings cut, dead, just like that. A chill ran through Alex. I panicked, called it in. Cops came, ruled it as natural causes. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Lyle wasn't supposed to be there. And yet, every few years, he returns. Alex's mind was spinning. If this has been happening, why hasn't anyone investigated before? Grayson gave her a haunted look. Because every cop who tried, they all backed off. Files disappeared. Reports were buried. The subway is old, detective, older than the city itself. There are things beneath it, things that don't want to be uncovered. Alex's heart pounded. What kind of things? Grayson's eyes flickered toward the door, as if he expected someone to be listening. There are tunnels down there, ones that don't show up on any map. They've been sealed off for decades. But some say they still lead somewhere. Alex felt a knot tighten in her stomach. And you think Henry Lyle is connected to them? Grayson hesitated, then whispered, I think he came from them. A heavy silence filled the room. Alex exhaled, standing up. She had heard her fair share of urban legends. But there was something about Grayson's voice's sheer terror that made her uneasy. She grabbed her notepad, turning toward the door. I need to see those tunnels. Grayson's voice stopped her. Detective, listen to me. She turned back, and the fear in his eyes was real. If you go down there, be careful. Some passengers, they never make it back. Alex nodded slowly. Then I guess I'll have to make sure I do. And with that, she left the room heading straight for the darkness that lay beneath the city. The subway tunnels were colder than Alex expected. Not just from the underground air, but from something deeper, something unnatural. The walls were slick with moisture, and the scent of damp concrete mixed with decades of rust and grime. The further she walked, the quieter the world above became, until all she could hear was the distant hum of the city's lifeblood trains rattling somewhere in the distance. She had managed to get access to the maintenance tunnels with some well-placed favors and a falsified work order, but she knew she wouldn't have long before someone noticed. Officer Dan Ridgway walked beside her, a flashlight in one hand, his other resting on the holster at his hip. "This is insane," he muttered. "You realize that, right?" Alex didn't answer. She kept moving, her own flashlight sweeping across the old, crumbling walls. The map she had pulled from archives showed 3 tunnels beneath Bay Street Station, but only 2 were still in use. The third? It had been sealed off decades ago, and no official records stated why. And that was the tunnel she was looking for. "Here," she said, stopping in front of a rusted metal door set into the wall. It was barely visible beneath layers of peeling paint and grime. The words "restricted access," "do not enter" were faint, but still legible. Ridgway ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Carter, if you tell me you're actually thinking of going in there..." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crowbar. "Damn it," he sighed, stepping back as she wedged the tool into the door's seam and yanked hard. The lock snapped with a sickening crack, and the door groaned open, revealing a tunnel that hadn't been touched in decades. The air that hit them was different, stale, heavy. Ridgway covered his nose. "Smells like something died in here." Alex stepped inside. Maybe something did. The tunnel was vast, far larger than Alex had expected. The tracks that ran through it were old, warped with time, yet the strangest part was that they didn't seem abandoned. There were footprints in the dust-fresh ones. She shone her flashlight along the walls, revealing faded advertisements from another era. Posters for long-defunct businesses, a film that had premiered 20 years ago, and a half-torn subway map that still showed stations that no longer existed. Something about it sent a deep chill through her. Ridgway crouched near the tracks, rubbing a gloved hand over the footprints. "Someone's been here recently. We're not alone." Alex felt her heartbeat quicken. "Then we keep moving." They followed the tunnel for what felt like miles, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the thick silence. It was oppressive, the kind of quiet that felt like it was watching you. Then Alex saw it. A train car, standing alone on the tracks. But it wasn't like the others. This one was ancient, its metal exterior corroded, its windows clouded with dust and grime. The number on its side was barely visible, T-42. Alex's pulse pounded in her ears. T-42 was the same number Henry Lyle's tickets had listed. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for the door handle. The second her fingers brushed the cold metal, the lights inside the train flickered on. A deep, guttural noise echoed through the tunnel, like the sound of something mechanical waking up after years of slumber. Ridgway took a step back. "Carter, tell me, this isn't happening." Alex swallowed hard, gripping her flashlight tighter. "I don't think we're supposed to be here." Then the door slid open on its own. And inside, sitting in the last seat, was Henry Lyle. Lyle's body was exactly as it had been found on the Bay Street train, his gray suit neatly pressed, his hands folded on his lap, his face eerily serene. Except for one thing. This time, his eyes were open. Alex felt her stomach twist. They were black, void of light, as if whatever was sitting in that seat was just wearing Henry Lyle's body. Then he moved. Not much, just his fingers, curling slightly against his lap, but it was enough to make every instinct in Alex's body scream run. Ridgway's voice was tight with fear. "Carter, we need to go. Now." But Alex stepped closer. "Henry Lyle," she said, her voice steady despite the ice running through her veins. His mouth opened slightly, lips dry, cracked. When he spoke, it was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Alex's breath hitched. "Tell me what happened to you." Lyle blinked. Slowly. "I never left." Ridgway's patience snapped. He grabbed Alex's arm. "We're leaving." But as they turned, the train doors slammed shut. The lights flickered wildly, casting shadows that moved on their own. A deep, low hum filled the air, vibrating through the metal, through their bones. It wasn't mechanical. It was something alive. Lyle's voice came again, but this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was dozens of whispers, layered over each other, echoing through the train like a chorus of lost souls. "We never left." The train lurched forward. Alex stumbled, grabbing onto a metal pole to steady herself. "What the hell is happening?" Ridgway pounded against the door, trying to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. Lyle's black eyes stared at them. "We ride until it lets us go." Alex's breath came fast. "Until what lets us go?" For the first time, a flicker of something human crossed Lyle's expression. The thing beneath. The train picked up speed, hurtling into the depths of the tunnel, a tunnel that wasn't supposed to exist. And as Alex looked out the window, she saw something she would never be able to explain. A station buried deep underground, its platform lined with figures, people who weren't moving. They stood in perfect rows, staring at the train as it rushed past. Their faces were rotting, hollow, waiting. Then the lights went out, and Alex realized this wasn't a subway. It was a graveyard. Darkness swallowed everything. For a moment, Alex Carter couldn't breathe. The air inside the train felt thicker, pressing in on her chest. She reached out blindly, her fingers gripping the metal pole beside her. The vibrations in the floor beneath her boots told her the train was still moving fast. Somewhere to her right, Ridgway's voice cut through the blackness. "Alex?" She exhaled. "I'm here." The only source of light was a flickering emergency bulb near the ceiling, casting erratic flashes of pale yellow across the cabin. That was when she realized something was wrong. Henry Lyle's seat, the last row, where he had been sitting just moments before, was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. "Ridgway! Where the hell did he go?" There was no time for an answer. The train slowed abruptly, nearly throwing them both forward. Alex caught herself against the wall, Ridgway cursing as he braced against a pole. A mechanical groan echoed through the metal walls, like something ancient waking from a deep sleep. Then silence. The train had stopped. A dim light seeped in through the windows. Alex turned to look and felt her stomach drop. They weren't at any known station. The platform outside stretched far beyond the train's length, lined with decayed advertisements from another century. A thick layer of dust and mold clung to every surface. The air was thick, carrying the scent of damp rot and something else, something old. Alex squinted at the sign above the platform. The letters were faded, some barely readable. But when she pieced them together, her blood ran cold. Blackwater Station. That wasn't possible. Blackwater Station had been shut down in 1952. It was one of the city's oldest stations, sealed off decades ago due to an unexplained series of disappearances. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore, and yet there they were. Ridgway's voice was tight with fear. "This station, it's not on any maps." Alex swallowed hard. "I know." Then came the sound. A faint shuffle. Not from the train. From the platform. She turned her flashlight toward the station's edge, and what she saw made her blood turn to ice. They were standing there, rows of them. Figures, dozens of them lining the platform. They weren't moving, just standing, watching. Their faces were wrong, frozen in expressions of hollow emptiness, some locked in twisted grimaces. Their clothes were from different time periods, old suits from the 1940s, tattered uniforms, modern jackets coated in dust, as if they had all arrived at different times, but never left. Alex's throat tightened. These weren't people. They were passengers who never made it back. Then of them moved. A man near the front of the platform, his neck jerking unnaturally, his jaw opening wide too wide. And then, all at once, they started stepping forward. The doors hissed open. Alex's heart slammed against her ribs. "Move!" she shouted. She grabbed Ridgway and bolted. They lunged out of the train just as the figures stepped in. Their movements were stiff, robotic one by one, filling the seats, sliding into place as if returning to a journey they had never finished. Alex yanked Ridgway down behind a rusted ticket machine, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The last passenger entered. The doors sealed shut. Then, without a conductor, without any signal, the train pulled away. It disappeared into the tunnel's darkness. The figures inside never turned to look back. And just like that, they were gone. Alex pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. Ridgway was shaking beside her. "Carter, what the hell was that?" She couldn't answer, because what haunted her most was what she had seen before the train left. Henry Lyle, sitting among the passengers, looking directly at her, and smiling. "We need to get out of here," Ridgway said, his voice sharp with panic. Alex forced herself to think. There should be a maintenance exit. If this station was sealed off, it has to have an emergency access point. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, just a black screen staring back at her. That's when they heard the footsteps. Not from the train. From inside the station, they weren't alone. Alex turned her flashlight toward the sound. A figure stood at the far end of the platform, half hidden in the shadows. Unlike the passengers, he was alive. An old man, dressed in a faded subway conductor's uniform. His gray beard was unkempt, his hat tilted slightly over tired eyes. He stared at Alex and Ridgway for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You weren't supposed to see that." Alex's grip tightened on her flashlight. "Who are you?" The man took a slow step forward, his boots scraping against the old tile. "I was the conductor, a long time ago." His voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "And I am the only one who ever got off this train." Ridgway tensed. "What does that mean?" The old man exhaled, looking down the tunnel where the train had vanished. "You think that train runs on a schedule?" Alex narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" The conductor turned his gaze back to her. "That train doesn't run on tracks." A heavy silence hung between them. Ridgway scoffed, shaking his head. "Great, another lunatic. Let's go, Carter." But Alex didn't move, because something about the conductor's words felt true. She looked around the platform again, the way the dust seemed disturbed in strange patterns, the way the walls felt like they stretched beyond what was physically possible. This place, it didn't belong to the city anymore. It belonged to whatever was beneath it. Alex turned back to the conductor. "Then what does it run on?" His tired eyes darkened. "It runs on the lost." The words sent a chill through her spine. The conductor gestured toward the far end of the platform. "There's an exit, but you don't have much time." Alex didn't hesitate. "Come with us." The old man shook his head. "I've been waiting here for that train for 30 years. If I leave, it'll come for me." Ridgway looked at Alex. "Let's move." She hesitated just a second longer, then turned and ran. The conductor watched as they disappeared through the rusted maintenance door. Then, he turned back to the tunnel, watching, waiting, and somewhere in the distance the train's whistle echoed once more. It was coming back, and this time, it wasn't empty. Alex Carter sprinted through the rusted maintenance passage, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. The tunnel's ceiling was low, forcing her and Ridgway to duck slightly as they ran. The dim light from her flashlight bounced off the damp concrete walls, casting long, jagged shadows. The old conductor's words still echoed in her mind. "It runs on the lost." What the hell did that mean? Ahead of her, Ridgway stumbled, catching himself against the wall. "Carter, tell me you know where we're going." She didn't, but she couldn't say that now. "Keep moving," she said, her voice tight. "The station map said there's an emergency access door at the end of this passage." Ridgway muttered a curse under his breath, but followed her lead. The air inside the tunnel felt wrong, stale, yet thick like something unseen was pressing down on them. Then the sound came again. A distant whistle. Alex's breath caught. It was closer. The train was coming back. She pushed forward, the beam of her flashlight sweeping over the tunnel floor. The passage curved slightly to the right, and at the far end, she saw it. A heavy metal door, rusted with age but still intact. "We're almost there," she breathed, picking up speed. Ridgway reached the door first and grabbed the handle. He pulled. Nothing. His fingers curled tighter around the handle as he yanked harder. It's jammed! Alex's flashlight flickered. The temperature in the tunnel dropped so fast that she could see her breath in the air. Then she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind them. Ridgway slammed his shoulder against the door. Come on, come on. Alex turned, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The passage behind them was dark, but she could see them, figures emerging from the shadows, stepping forward in unison. Their faces were wrongsome, looked normal at first glance, but their eyes were empty, their mouths slightly open as if frozen in a silent scream. Others were worse rotting, stretched, stuck in a moment between life and something else. Passengers. They were passengers who never got off the train. Alex's fingers tightened around her flashlight. Ridgway. Almost got it. They were getting closer. Alex reached for her gun, her pulse roaring in her ears. There was no way in hell she was getting on that train. Then, bang. Ridgway's shoulder slammed against the door with everything he had, and it gave way, swinging open with a screech of rusted metal. Go! He yelled. Alex turned and lunged through the doorway. Ridgway followed, slamming the door shut behind them. Silence. Only their ragged breathing filled the air. Then a single knock. Alex's body went cold. The knock came again, slow, rhythmic. Then it stopped. She exhaled shakily, her back pressed against the wall. Ridgway wiped a hand across his face, his jaw clenched. That, he swallowed. That wasn't human. Alex didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because she knew, whatever was on the other side of that door, it had never been human. The emergency door had led them into another tunnel, but it wasn't the subway. Alex's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing walls made of old stone, their surfaces cracked and worn with time. The air here was even colder, damp with the scent of earth and decay. Ridgway looked around, his expression tense. This doesn't look like a maintenance tunnel. Alex moved forward cautiously. Because it's not. Something about the stone walls felt ancient, older than the subway system itself. As she swept her flashlight across the ceiling, she noticed something strange archways. The tunnel wasn't built like a subway passage. It was something else entirely. Then she saw the symbols. Carved into the stone were markings, deep and jagged. Some looked like letters, but not in any language she recognized. What the hell is this place? Ridgway muttered. Alex had no answer. But she had a feeling they had stumbled into something buried beneath the city for a reason. Her flashlight flickered again. Then the ground trembled. Ridgway grabbed her arm. Did you feel that? Alex didn't answer. She was staring ahead, her pulse quickening. There was light in the distance. Not artificial light. Firelight. Someone or something was down here. Without a word, she started walking toward it. Ridgway hesitated before following. The tunnel widened, opening into a massive underground chamber. Stone pillars lined the space, some cracked and crumbling, others standing tall, as if defying time itself. At the center of the chamber, a pit of fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. But it was what stood beyond the fire that sent a cold wave of fear through Alex's veins. A massive doorway, built from the same ancient stone, loomed in the darkness. Unlike the rest of the chamber, the door looked new, as if it had been sealed recently. And carved into its surface was a symbol Alex had seen before. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the photo of Henry Lyle's train ticket. Her hands trembled as she compared the two images. They were identical. Ridgway's voice was barely a whisper. That door, it's connected to the train, isn't it? Alex's mind was spinning. The train wasn't just an urban legend. It wasn't some abandoned ghost line. It was something else, something old, something hungry. She turned to Ridgway. We need to open that door. His eyes widened. Are you out of your damn mind? After everything we just saw. We came down here for answers, Alex cut in. And this is the key. Ridgway clenched his jaw, looking at the door like it might breathe. Then, before either of them could take another step, a sound rumbled through the chamber. A deep, resonating knock. Coming from the other side of the door, Alex and Ridgway froze. Then, the knocking grew louder, more urgent. Something or someone was trying to get out. And for the first time in her career, Alex Carter wondered if she had finally gone too far. The knocking continued. Deep, rhythmic, unnatural. Each thud reverberated through the ancient chamber, shaking loose dust from the crumbling stone pillars. The fire in the pit flickered violently, as if the air itself was reacting to whatever was on the other side of that door. Alex Carter's pulse pounded in her ears. Ridgway gripped his gun tighter, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Tell me we're not opening that thing!" Alex stared at the massive stone door, her fingers tightening around the photo of Henry Lyle's train ticket. The identical symbol carved into the stone made her gut twist. She exhaled sharply. "I don't think it's about us opening it." Ridgway turned to her, eyes narrowing. "What the hell does that mean?" Alex ran a hand through her hair, trying to piece it together. "The train! The passengers! The ones who never got off!" She motioned toward the symbol on the door. They were part of something bigger. The train isn't just moving through the subway, it's moving through this place. She stepped closer to the door. The stone was ice cold beneath her fingertips. Ridgway tensed. "Carter!" Before he could finish, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then, slowly, the stone door began to move. It wasn't from anything they had done. The door was opening on its own. The grinding sound of stone against stone sent a shiver down Alex's spine. Dust and debris fell from the archway as a slit of darkness appeared between the two massive slabs. Ridgway backpedaled fast, yanking Alex with him. "Nope, nope, nope, nope." The slit widened. Beyond it, there was no light, no sound, just an endless void. Alex's instincts screamed at her to run. But before she could move, a hand reached through the gap. Her breath caught. It wasn't human. The skin was stretched thin, almost gray, the fingers too long, the joints slightly wrong, like something that had once been human but had forgotten how to be. Then another hand, and another. More hands reached through the gap, pressing against the stone, pulling the door open further. Ridgway raised his gun. "I swear to God, Carter, you better start running!" Alex didn't argue. She turned and bolted Ridgway right behind her. They sprinted across the chamber, past the fire pit, past the crumbling pillars. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, a chorus of voices speaking in a language Alex didn't recognize. It was coming from the door, and whatever was behind, it was getting closer. Alex and Ridgway didn't stop running. The ancient tunnel twisted and turned, and the further they went, the more wrong the walls became. The stone was different, shifting in color, texture almost organic. Alex's flashlight flickered. Then the whispers changed. Now they were saying her name. "Alex." Her chest tightened. She yanked Ridgway to a stop. "Did you hear that?" Ridgway was pale as hell. "Oh yeah, I heard it." Thena knew sound, not whispers. Footsteps, not behind them. Ahead. Alex raised her flashlight, heart hammering. A figure stood in the tunnel. At first, it looked human. A man in a gray suit, standing perfectly still. Then Alex saw his face. Her stomach turned to ice. It was Henry Lyle, but something was wrong. His eyes weren't black anymore. Now they were empty sockets. His mouth opened too wide and a voice that wasn't his rasped. "You shouldn't have come here." Then he moved. Not walking, gliding. Fast. Right at them. "Move!" Alex shouted. They tore down the tunnel, running harder than they ever had before. Behind them, the whispers swelled. Henry Lyle's laughter or whatever was inside Heimacode through the darkness. Then the walls began to shift. The tunnel was changing. It was closing in. Alex's flashlight died. Everything went black, and that was when she felt it. the cold hand wrap around her wrist and pull her down. The cold hand gripped Alex Carter's wrist with an inhuman strength, yanking her downward into the abyss. She barely had time to scream before she was falling not onto solid ground, but into something deeper, something endless. The darkness swallowed her whole. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just the sensation of weightlessness, of time stretching infinitely. Her own breath echoed in her ears, but she couldn't see, couldn't feel anything. Then impact. Alex hit the ground hard. The wind knocked from her lungs. Her body ached. Her skin felt frozen. The air was thick, humid wrong. Her flashlight was gone. The only light was a faint, pulsing glow ahead of her, casting eerie shadows along wet, glistening stone walls. She forced herself to sit up, pulse hammering in her ears. "Ridgway?" she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then movement. Not his. Something else. Something watching. She turned her head slowly, dread curling in her stomach. The tunnel stretched ahead, but it wasn't empty. Figures stood in the distance, partially obscured by shadows. They were passengers, the same ones from the subway, the ones who had boarded the train but never left. Only now, they weren't frozen. Now, they were moving, shuffling, twitching, coming toward her. Alex scrambled to her feet, her breath ragged. Run. Move. Now. She turned to bolt and crashed straight into Ridgway. He yelled, both of them nearly collapsing in a heap. "Carter!" Ridgway gasped, grabbing her shoulders. Alex's entire body was shaking. "We have to go. Now." She pointed behind her. Ridgway saw them too, his face drained of color. "Oh, hell." They ran. The tunnel stretched endlessly, twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Alex's lungs burned, but she couldn't stop. The air behind them was shifting, the temperature dropping. The passengers weren't running, but they were getting closer, faster than they should be. Ridgway gasped between breaths. "Where are we going?" Alex barely had an answer. Just away. Then, a sound. A low, vibrating hum. The same sound from the train. Alex's chest tightened. The tunnel ahead opened up into a massive cavern, and at the center of it, another train. It wasn't modern. It wasn't right. It looked old, like something that predated the city itself. The metal was rusted, the windows fogged with time, and inside, more passengers. Waiting, not moving, but watching. Alex skidded to a halt, heart pounding. "What the hell is this?" Ridgway doubled over, gasping for air. "This isn't real!" Alex wasn't sure what was real anymore. Then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the far end of the cavern. Alex turned. A man stepped forward. At first, he looked normal, wearing an old subway uniform, the same kind conductors wore decades ago. His hat was tilted, his coat buttoned up. But when he looked up at her, Alex felt the breath freeze in her chest. His eyes were black pits. His face was familiar. Henry Lyle, or whatever was using his body. He smiled. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. His voice wasn't his. It was many voices, layered on top of each other. Alex's hand went for her gun. Henry tilted his head. "That won't help you." Behind him, the train doors opened. More figures stepped out. Passengers. Hundreds of them. Alex's stomach dropped. Because she knew they weren't going to run this time. They were here to take her, to add her to the train, to make her one of them. Ridgway grabbed her wrist. "Carter, Missouri V!" But before they could run, the passengers charged, and the lights went out. Darkness. Not just the absence of light, but something thicker, heavier, a black void that pressed down on Alex Carter's chest, threatening to crush her. She could still hear them, the passengers, moving in unison, their hollow footsteps filling the cavern. She couldn't see, but she knew they were close. Ridgway's grip on her wrist was tight, his breathing ragged. "Carter!" A hand grabbed her shoulder. Not Ridgway's. It was cold, like the air inside a sealed tomb. Alex ripped away, stumbling backward. Thina, flicker of light, just enough to illuminate the figures surrounding them. Passengers, dozens, hundreds. Their faces were locked in frozen screams, their mouths twisted open, but no sound came from them. Then one moved. A woman in an old-fashioned dress twitched forward. Her joints cracked, her body stiff like a puppet on invisible strings. Alex drew her gun. Ridgway did the same. But Henry Lylure, whatever wore his, face-stepped forward, smiling. "You don't understand," he said, his voice layered inhuman. "There's no need to run." Alex's finger tightened on the trigger. But before she could fire, Henry raised a hand, and the passengers stopped. Just like that. Frozen. Waiting. A beat of silence. Then Henry spoke again. "You have a choice." Alex swallowed hard. "What choice?" Henry's empty eyes locked onto her. "A train must always have a conductor." Her breath hitched. "What the hell does that mean?" Ridgway snapped. Henry tilted his head, as if he found the question amusing. Someone must guide the lost. Someone must keep the train moving. He stepped forward, stopping just a few feet from Alex. "You don't have to die here, Detective Carter," he said softly. "You can take my place." Alex felt her stomach drop. Ridgway stiffened beside her. "Oh, hell no." Henry ignored him. His black eyes didn't blink. "You take my place, and I get off the train," he continued. "You can end the cycle. You can save yourself." Alex's heartbeat thundered in her ears. This was a trick. It had to be. "You're lying," she said. Henry smiled wider. "Am I?" The passengers took a step forward. All of them. In perfect unison. Alex's throat tightened. Henry leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't have much time." Alex's grip on her gun trembled. She had seconds to make a choice. Then she realized something. Henry Lyle had never wanted to get off the train. Because he never could. This wasn't a deal. It was a trap. Her pulse roared. "Ridgway!" He understood immediately. They turned and ran. The cavern shifted around them, the walls closing in as they ran. Alex could hear the passengers behind them not running, but moving, like the train itself was pulling them forward. Then the tunnel forked. Two paths. One was pitch black, the other a glow, faint, flickering. A train track, and a train coming straight toward them. Alex's chest seized. "Move!" She grabbed Ridgway, and they lunged onto the tracks just as the train roared past them. For a moment, all she could see was motion. Thina door, a subway door, partially open. She jumped. Ridgway followed. And suddenly, they were inside the train. Not the old one. A real subway car. A familiar one. They were back on the Bay Street line. The train was empty. The lights were normal. The air clean. Alex and Ridgway sat in stunned silence, breathing hard. The train slowed, then stopped. The doors slid open. A robotic voice came over the speakers. "Last stop, Bay Street Station." Alex barely moved. Her hands were shaking. Ridgway turned to her. "Tell me, that actually just happened." She couldn't. Because when she looked down at her hand, she was still holding Henry Lyle's train ticket. A fresh one. With one word written in red ink, "Next." The doors stayed open. And Alex Carter knew this wasn't over. It would never be over. Somewhere, in the tunnels beneath the city, the train was still waiting, still running, still looking for its next passenger. The fluorescent lights of the Bay Street station buzzed softly, casting a pale glow over the empty platform. Alex Carter stood in the open subway doors, her breath unsteady, her mind still trapped between reality and whatever twisted nightmare she and Ridgway had barely escaped. Her fingers clenched the train ticket, its edges slightly worn. The single word, "Next," written in deep, inky red, burning into her thoughts. Ridgway sat on the bench inside the train, his head in his hands, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of whatever the hell they had just lived through. The station around them was eerily still, too still, as if time had momentarily stalled just for them. The train's doors remained open, as if expecting them to step off, but neither of them moved. Alex's heart was still racing, her brain clawing for logic, for answers, for some way to make sense of the impossible. Had they really just been there inside a buried station that hadn't existed for nearly 70 years? Had they really just seen Henry Lyle or whatever had become of him offering her the role of conductor to the lost? And most of all, had they really just escaped? She turned to Ridgway, who exhaled shakily, rubbing his face before looking at her with wide, exhausted eyes. "Tell me we made it back." His voice was rough, his words barely a whisper, like he was afraid the moment he spoke too loud, reality might shift again. Alex swallowed the lump in her throat and finally stepped off the train, her boots hitting the platform with a weight that felt both real and surreal at once. She scanned the Ariana thing out of the ordinary. The advertisements were modern, the turnstiles clean, the station exactly as she remembered it. But still, something lingered, a feeling, a pressure in the air, as if unseen eyes still watched them from the tunnels. "We're here," she said, but it didn't feel like an answer, more like a question she didn't want to ask. Ridgway hesitated before stepping off the train, his gaze darting toward the operator's cabin, half expecting to see someone or something inside, but it was empty. The train doors slid closed behind them, and Alex turned to watch as it pulled away, the headlights cutting through the underground gloom. Just before it disappeared into the tunnel, she swore she saw a silhouette in the last seat just for a second. Then, the train was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Ridgway exhaled heavily and leaned against a pillar, his hands still resting on the holster at his hip, as if his gun could have done anything against what they had faced. "All right," he finally muttered. "So, what now? We just pretend this didn't happen? Go home, act like we didn't just..." He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "Like we didn't just see all that?" Alex didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the train ticket, running her thumb over the word written in red. Next. It didn't make sense, but that didn't change the fact that it was real. Whatever they had found down there, whatever the train really was, it wasn't finished with them. Maybe it was never finished with anyone. Maybe Henry Lyle had been just one of many, waiting for his turn to finally end, for someone else to take his place. A chill slithered down Alex's spine as she thought about the passengers, their hollow, waiting expressions, their silent movements, like they weren't moving of their own accord, but were being guided by something else. Her mind flashed back to the cavern, to the sealed stone door, to the hands that had reached through it. What had been on the other side? What had been trying to get out? And worse, had they let it? "Carter?" Ridgway's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up at him. "We need to find out what happened in 1952, she said. He blinked. "What?" "Blackwater Station," she clarified, turning toward the exit. "It was shut down, but no official records explain why. They just buried it, covered it up. But that place it wasn't abandoned. It wasn't forgotten. It was waiting." Ridgway's jaw tensed. "So you're saying this isn't over?" Alex let out a slow breath, glancing once more toward the dark tunnel where the train had disappeared. "I don't think it ever was." They walked up the stairs, exiting the station and stepping back onto the city streets. The air was crisp, cold against Alex's skin, but it felt too normal-like the world had gone on completely unaware that something deep beneath it had shifted. The hum of cars, the distant chatter of people, the blinking streetlights, it all felt wrong after what they had just experienced. She reached into her pocket again, gripping the train ticket tightly, feeling the reality of it beneath her fingers. Next, her gut told her that Henry Lyle hadn't been lying, not entirely. A train always needed a conductor. A train always needed passengers. And something deep beneath the city was making sure it never ran empty. She exchanged a look with Ridgway, both of them knowing this was far from over. Whatever was happening beneath the city, whatever force was controlling that train, it had marked them. And the next time that train came back, it wouldn't be waiting. It would be coming for them. The cold night air did little to clear Alex Carter's mind as she and Ridgway walked away from Bay Street Station, the weight of what they had just experienced pressing against her chest like a vice. The city around them hummed with life cars speeding past, neon lights flickering in shop windows, people walking the streets with no idea that, just beneath their feet, something unnatural was moving. Alex still held the train ticket in her pocket, its edges worn, its message clear next. They didn't speak for a while. Ridgway's boots scuffed against the pavement, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his jaw tight. Alex could tell he was struggling to process everything. But then again, how could they? What words could possibly make sense of passengers who never left a train, of a station that wasn't supposed to exist, of a man who had died decades ago but still rode the subway, whispering of a role that needed to be filled? Finally, Ridgway broke the silence. "So, what's the plan, Carter?" His voice was low, serious. "We can't just walk back into the precinct and say, 'Hey, boss, we just got back from a train ride into a forgotten hell dimension, and oh, by the way, we might be next on its passenger list.'" Alex exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down her face. "Number, we can't." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "But we can start by figuring out why this happened." "Why?" Ridgway scoffed, shaking his head. "Does it even matter? That thing, whatever it is going to keep running. Whether we understand it or not, it's not stopping." Alex pulled out the train ticket and held it up under the glow of a streetlight. The red ink still burned against the worn paper. "It marked us," she said quietly. "We got away, Ridgway, but we didn't get off its radar. We're still on the list. If we don't figure out what this means, the next time that train comes, we might not get a choice." Ridgway stared at the ticket, his jaw tightening. "Fine," he muttered. "Where do we start?" Alex had already thought about that. "Blackwater Station," she said. "The city sealed it off in 1952. But why? What happened down there that made them bury it?" Ridgway let out a slow breath, nodding reluctantly. "All right, let's say we look into it. Where the hell do we find information on a place that officially doesn't exist?" A thought flickered through Alex's mind. Walter Grayson. The old subway conductor had told her to be careful, had warned her that those who went looking for the truth never came back, and yet he had known something. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. It was late, but not too late. "I have a lead," she said, already walking toward her car. Ridgway groaned but followed. "I swear to God, if this involves another creepy old man with subway horror stories, I'm quitting." Alex didn't answer, because deep down, she wasn't sure this was just a horror story anymore. It was something much worse. Riverside Retirement Home looked different at night, quieter, more abandoned. The dull glow of fluorescent lights flickered through the lobby windows as Alex and Ridgway stepped inside. The receptionist from earlier barely looked up, too absorbed in a late-night television show. Alex walked straight toward room 214. She knocked once. No answer. "Grayson," she called. Still nothing. Her gut twisted. Something felt wrong. She tried the door handle. Unlocked. She exchanged a wary glance with Ridgway before pushing it open. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. The faint hum of a television played static on a muted screen. The bed was empty. But Walter Grayson was there, sitting in his recliner. Still. Too still. Alex felt her breath catch. "Grayson?" No response. She stepped closer. Then she saw it. His eyes were wide open, unblinking. His mouth was slightly parted, frozen in a silent scream. And in his lap, a train ticket. Alex's stomach dropped. She reached down slowly, carefully lifting the ticket. The ink was fresh. The date was today. Ridgway cursed under his breath. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Alex's throat felt dry. Grayson had known. He had always known. And no one had come for him. The old man's hands were still curled around the arms of his chair, his knuckles pale. He had died sitting up, like he hadn't even had a chance to fight. Or like he had known fighting was pointless. Alex turned the ticket over. A single word was written on the back in shaky, desperate handwriting. "Run." She felt the chill seep into her bones. They were running out of time, and the train was coming back. They left Riverside Retirement Home in silence, both of them sitting in Alex's car, the city's glow flickering through the windshield. Alex gripped the steering wheel, staring at the train ticket in her hand. "It's moving faster," she said finally. Ridgway frowned. "What do you mean?" Alex turned to him. "Henry Lyle was dead for 20 years before he reappeared on that train. But Grayson? He knew about it, talked about it, and now, just hours after we got back, he's dead." Ridgway rubbed his face. "So what? You're saying it's accelerating?" Alex nodded. "It's getting closer." Ridgway exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Then what the hell do we do, Carter?" Alex didn't answer. Not immediately. Because deep down, she already knew. Blackwater Station. The answers were down there. And whether she wanted to or not, she was going to have to go back. The entrance to Blackwater Station wasn't on any modern map, but Alex Carter had pieced it together from fragments of forgotten transit records and the dying whispers of Walter Grayson. The old conductor had been a warning, a reminder that once you stepped too far into its world, you didn't come back. But Alex wasn't running. Not anymore. The tunnels beneath the city were colder this time, as if the air itself was waiting, expectant. Ridgway walked beside her, silent, his flashlight flickering against damp concrete walls, the grime of decades untouched clinging to every surface. The further they went, the more the city above seemed to fodder no vibrations of passing trains, no distant echoes of life, just the pull of something ancient, something waiting. The tracks they followed were warped with time, unused, but Alex knew better now this train didn't run on metal and wheels. It ran on those who were lost, those who never found their way back. And if she didn't stop this, she and Ridgway would be next. The tunnel opened into a massive underground cavern, and Alex's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the train. It stood in the center of the hollowed-out station, its exterior corroded with time, its headlights a faint, sickly yellow glow. But inside, the passengers were waiting. Motionless figures, their faces frozen in eerie silence, their hollow eyes locked on nothing and everything at once. Alex felt Ridgway tense beside her, gripping his gun as if it could protect them from something that didn't belong to the world anymore. And then, from the darkness, he stepped out. Henry Lyle. Or what had become of him? He still wore the same gray suit, still held the same knowing smirk, but his eyes were nothing but black voids now, stretching endlessly, as if they weren't eyes at all, but windows into something else. "You came back," he said, voice smooth, layered, like 100 voices speaking at once. "I was hoping you would." Alex held up the train ticket, the word next still etched in red. "It's not going to be me." Henry tilted his head. "That's not your choice." The cavern trembled. The train let out a deep, unnatural groan, as if something beneath it was stirring. Ridgway raised his gun. "I don't know what the hell you are," he spat, "but we're not getting on that damn train." Henry chuckled. "Oh, detective, you already have." And suddenly, the ground shifted. The walls around them melted away, and Alex's stomach lurched as she realized they were already inside the train. The seats stretched endlessly in both directions, the passengers sitting perfectly still, their dead eyes locked forward. The train lurched forward. Alex's chest tightened. They were moving. She wasn't doing this. She wasn't becoming one of them. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed Ridgway's arm and started running down the aisle, past the unmoving passengers, past the doors that refused to open, past the faces that seemed to shift and recognize her. Then, at the far end of the car, she saw it. The conductor's booth. The controls. She lunged forward, Ridgway right behind her, slamming her fists against the door. It gave way with a crack, and they stumbled inside. The panel was old, decayed, but one thing was clear: this train didn't have an operator, because it didn't need one. The train ran itself. It was alive. Alex grabbed the lever, the one that looked like it controlled everything. Henry's voice echoed through the train. "You can't stop it!" Alex clenched her jaw. "Watch me." And she pulled. The world screamed. The train shuddered violently, the windows cracking, the passengers lurching forward, their mouths opening in silent howls. Henry lurched toward them, his form flickering, distorting, as if he was fighting against something bigger than himself. The train let out a monstrous roar, the very walls of reality splitting apart, and then everything went white. Alex gasped as she hit solid ground, her hands scraping against the cold subway platform of Bay Street Station. The overhead lights flickered weakly, the scent of dust and stale air filling her lungs. She turned sharply. Ridgway was beside her, groaning, disoriented but alive. And the train? Gone. The tracks were empty, silent, as if it had never been there at all. Ridgway coughed, pushing himself up. Did we? His breath hitched when he saw what Alex was holding. She looked down. A single train ticket. Except this time, it wasn't marked next. It was marked canceled. Alex's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. They had stopped it. Whatever that thing had been, whatever had been pulling people into the darkness for decades, they had broken its cycle. Ridgway let out a ragged laugh, shaking his head. I am never taking the subway again. Alex exhaled, her grip tightening around the ticket. She didn't tell him the one thing she couldn't shake, the one thought that had burrowed into her mind like a splinter. If they had broken the cycle, then what happened to the passengers who had already been taken? And deep beneath the city, where the walls were carved in symbols no one could understand, where the tunnels stretched into places no human had ever mapped, something watched and waited.